Hallo und herzlich willkommen zurück zu unserer Themenwoche Zeit für Forschung. Hier geht es jetzt weiter mit einem Panel, auf das ich mich besonders freue, nämlich Automation and the Future of Work. Wir beschäftigen uns mit der Frage, was Automatisierung eigentlich für unsere Arbeit bedeutet. Wie Sie vielleicht schon anhand des Titels gedacht haben, wird dieses Panel auf Englisch stattfinden. Und bevor wir starten, habe ich eine Frage an Sie, liebes Publikum. Können Sie sich vorstellen, dass Ihr Job automatisiert wird? Und jetzt wechsle ich ins Englische und stelle unsere beiden Panelisten vor. I'm very excited about my two panelists today. Sabine Pfeiffer is a professor at Friedrich-Alexander-Universität in Erlangen-Nürnberg, and she works at the intersection of technology, work, and society. And Benanav is an economic historian and social theorist and a postdoctoral researcher at Humboldt-Universität in Berlin. And he wrote a book on automation and the future of work, in which he unravels the deeper problems of our economies and hence the demand for labor. Ms. Pfeiffer, Mr. Benanav, welcome and hello.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, and hello to all the audience we can't see.
As usual, if the audience has a question, they are able to ask that question via our tool Slido. And if you have any questions, I'll see the questions on my board here and we'll try to integrate them into our panel. Mr. Benanav, Ms. Pfeiffer, I'll start with a slightly personal question first. Do you believe a machine could take over your job?
Will you start? Or?
Go ahead.
Ms. Pfeiffer.
Okay, good question. I think as we tend to make even science more and more standardized and uniform and sometimes boring, we see a lot of processes like that. It's easier to automate some of the tasks that are part of our job. But of course, I think it's harder because we still have more tasks that are not so easy to standardize. And as for most professions, if you have an automation going on, it's more on the task level, not on the whole professional or job level. So I think that's true for us too.
What do you think, Mr. Benanav?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think if you asked me 15 months ago, would I think that professors could teach entirely online and that everything could happen from one's living room, I would have said, no, definitely not. And yet we have done that, right? So digital technologies have, during the Corona crisis, really transformed aspects of our intellectual labors. And in some ways that's been good and in some ways bad. I feel like most of the people I've talked to feel very fatigued from doing their work online. No one seems to think that this is the wave of the future. It was something that people felt like they suffered through. I mean, it's something maybe they could be made to suffer through in the future, but they'd see that as a really negative experience. So I think that digital technologies will, of course, continue to transform aspects of our labor. But I do think it's very unlikely, obviously, that university professors with all the kind of complex labor that involves could be replaced by machines anytime soon in the next 50 years.
Mm-hmm. Different surveys show that a lot of people would answer the way you do. They think that jobs will be automated, but not necessarily that their jobs will be automated. A Gallup survey from 2017 said, for example, that 73% of US adults believe that AI will eliminate more jobs than it creates. Only 23% worried about losing their own jobs. So we have a gap. I don't know, it might be a cognitive dissonance, I'm not sure. Where do you think that stems from?
I guess I could start on that. I think that what people see, which is really correct, is they intuit that it's getting harder for people to find jobs. And that's a general experience that after economic crises, it takes a long time for unemployment rates to go down. It's often governments have reformed labor markets to try to push people to get jobs because they find it so hard to find them otherwise. So there's a real anxiety about the labor market, and then people are connecting that to technological change, even though their own experience suggests that's unlikely to be what's going on in their own work.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, but maybe because we have similar surveys in Germany with similar outcomes, although I would say, especially before Corona, the labor market was kind of different. We came pretty quick out of the last crisis. I would say that mostly people, it's not cognitive dissonance, but it's people know about the complexities of their work. Mostly people who are doing the big picture prognosis, what will happen in 50 years, looking only top down on data, on labor market data, pretty often underestimate how complex work mostly is. And people know how complex it is. So they have a, I would say, not so bad gut feeling that it's not so easy to automate the whole picture of tasks they are doing, but maybe some of them. And the other thing is that people have the experience that jobs vanish, but that has not to be in a conjunction to technological change. Germany, we lost a lot of production jobs, not because of technology, but because they are now done somewhere else in the world with less levels of automation.
We'll get to that. Get back to that point. First of all, we just have the results of the summary of the survey that we just did, and I asked people the same thing that I asked you. I asked them, do you believe your job could be automated? And I think they will be happy to hear about what you said, because 71% don't think their jobs can be automated. And 29% obviously say, yeah, it might. Actually, they say yes, but what I found surprising is that even people whose jobs are very likely to be automated, or they seem very likely to be automated, they don't really think they will be. Truckers, for example. The New York Times journalist Wendy McNaughton talked to truckers once what they thought of autonomous trucks. Even they didn't believe they could be replaced. And one trucker being quoted with the sentence, "Nobody can do what we do." So you're both nodding. What do you think about this this perspective?
You should start.
Yes, please start, Ms. Pfeiffer.
I'm pretty sure the truck drivers are right here, because they are not just driving. For long years, they do a lot of more things. While they drive, pretty often they do disposition work. Now maybe more on the phone, but they do it. And there are still some things like uploading and offloading and things like that. So what they do is much more than just driving. And so if you, of course, if they will not have to drive anymore, they will, I'm pretty sure they will have to do a lot of administrative work while they drive, while they are driven.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that. I think that's really, really important, exactly that point, that drivers do a lot of other things, and that even if it were possible to automate, it seems like in the near future, the only thing that might be automated is driving on highways or freeways, like basically the long distance aspect of the drive, not the actual approach to any final destination. But it should be said that even that aspect of the job, recent reports suggested that even that is further away than we think. Like, they can get the machines to 95 or 97% accuracy, but they thought it would be much easier to close that remaining gap. And now a lot of researchers believe that there might be deeper problems with deep learning and machine learning. There might be limits to what those technologies can actually achieve, even with more processing power.
what you both say is particularly interesting, because when we talk about automation and the future of work, we often expect jobs to be fully automated instead of what is probably much more likely that they will be partly automated. You know, that maybe drivers will still sit in an autonomous truck. They might not drive it, but they will still do everything they do. Do you think we're having the wrong debate when we talk about automation, considering that a lot of times it's not really full automation that we're talking about?
Now you start.
Okay. I think a lot of people were misled by this early study by Frey and Osborne that was released in 2013 that said half of all jobs are likely to be automated. And they never said how long it would take. They just said at some point, given our current technologies. And all future studies that tried to replicate those results found that the authors failed to distinguish between jobs that would be partially automated, as you said, and fully automated. And so I think often in the media, the original Frey and Osborne study is usually what people are sort of citing because it's so exciting. And also, I think it, you know, maybe this gets at something a little deeper. I think it suggests an answer to why people, all of these kind of negative features of the economy that people perceive, rising inequality, job insecurity, and so on. It's not just that technology provides a possible explanation. It provides in some ways a potentially optimistic explanation, right? Because it suggests that the kind of problems that we have could be solved. Like if the only problem is that we're producing so much stuff and we don't have enough work for people, that seems like an easier problem to solve, whereas the real problems might turn out to be a little bit more difficult.
Let's get into those real problems. Ms. Pfeiffer, you already talked about those as well. You said people in Germany didn't lose their jobs to automation in a lot of ways, but they lost them because they were shipped overseas. Can you elaborate on that?
I mean, this is the whole discussion we have since the late 80s, at least since the 90s, that we are now not in the industrial era, but it's information society, knowledge society, and so on, service society. Always comes with the notion that production is somehow obsolete or not happening anymore. And this is what really a lot of people think, but that's not true, of course. We are producing much more than humanity did in history, if we look at in a global perspective. The production is alive and kicking. It's just not happening anymore that much in the old locations like Detroit. Yeah, I would say a lot of good paid jobs, especially in Germany, went somewhere, and still the same products come out the assembly lines, but work is less better there, less paid, and pretty often, even from the ecological aspects, it's worse. Because of course there's a reason companies bring labor somewhere else. It's not, they are not doing this because they are pretty good people and want to bring work to people who don't have work. It's because labor is cheaper there. That's the reason, and that's going on for decades now. And it will go on further. So we have to talk about the two, and not only focusing on automation.
Very, very important point. Mr. Benanav, you point out a pretty similar point in your book. You say that automation itself is not the problem, but the slowdown of economic productivity. Can you explain what you looked at and how you found those data and what it says?
Yeah, so I guess one thing that's really important to say is that, if it were the case that automation were the main culprit of the job loss, what you would expect to be happening, you'd expect to see that show up in labor productivity statistics. And sometimes people find that very confusing because they think, well, if machines are replacing workers, why would it seem like the workers were we're producing more and more, right? Like, why would it show up as labor productivity growth if it was really about machines replacing people? And that's just a mistake in how people intuit what the statistics say. The statistics are just looking at how much is produced divided by how many hours people are working. And so if people are being removed from production, that would show up in the labor productivity numbers as higher and higher, like really rapid labor productivity growth. And it's just the opposite what we see. We see slowdowns in labor productivity growth, even in manufacturing, which is surprising, that even in manufacturing, the rate of increasing technical efficiency with regard to labor, that's slowing down. And for the wider economy, it's significantly worse than in manufacturing. For the economy as a whole, labor productivity is really significantly slowed down. And because labor productivity is the main source of overall economic growth, that means also that the economy is growing much more slowly than it used to. Mm-hmm. And so in my view, just to put the point, the real problem today is not that jobs are being destroyed more quickly than they were in the past. It's not that technology is forcing workers out of jobs faster than it did before. Actually, workers used to be forced out of jobs much more quickly in the past. The real problem is that the economy is not growing quickly enough to create as many jobs as it did in the past. It's the slowdown in the economy that is, in some sense, the real culprit. And behind that is this, in a way, transition to a much more slower labor productivity growth economy. And we could talk about the reasons for that as well.
Yes, let's talk about the reasons for that. Ms. Pfeiffer, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I like to. There are a lot of reasons, and some are very, very on the root of the logic of our economic system. But I would look in a more concrete labor situation. If you look in our production lines, for example, in car manufacturing in Germany, this is highly automated, state of the art. What you can do on the technological side is put in for years and decades. So at the moment, what comes on top on the new Industry 4.0 things is mostly just more data-driven connections between what is already going on there and what is already automated, making even more dense connection between production and market. But it's not automation in the classical sense, like you think there comes one robot stepping in and 10 workers have to go. This happened years ago. So what I see when I go to the shop floor doing research there is mostly that what comes in now on the ICT level is rising the complexity. And rising the complexity, making the whole system even a little bit more fragile. So people have to step in more than before, because if you have a small failure, a small mistake somewhere in this big complex system, it can have like a domino effect, pretty huge consequences, which wasn't like that if you have not that high level on interconnection. So they are putting a lot of stuff in now because there's, of course, the idea we have to do it. We have to put AI into predictive maintenance, for example. But this is all technology where you don't have a productivity outcome. You're putting a lot of technology in and money, and pretty often you even need more people or people who are different or more highly qualified. So it's more driven, especially if you talk to management people, it's more driven by we have to hop on the bandwagon because everybody's doing it. We have to do it too, because maybe somewhere in the future it will pay out. We don't know, but we can't just don't do it.
Mm-hmm. I actually liked an example in Mr. Benanav's book. It was about self-checkout machines at supermarkets, and it was, maybe Mr. Benanav, you want to explain this example yourself, because I find this pretty much fits to what Ms. Pfeiffer says as well.
Yeah, I guess I was just pointing out that it's often very difficult to tell the difference between an automating technology and a kind of labor augmenting technology, like a labor replacing technology and a labor augmenting technology. And the example I give in the book is self-checkout machines, because some people might say, you know, what really happens when you go to a store, at least in America, that has self-checkout machines? I arrived in Germany during the pandemic, so I haven't spent very much time, I guess, in shops like that. But you know, what you usually see is there's a number of machines where people check themselves out, but there's a person there watching the machines and who intervenes if something goes wrong. And so from a statistician's standpoint, it's very hard to decide whether in that case cashiering has been automated or whether each cashier is now running 4 machines at the same time, right? So it's a difficulty even to figure out how to describe those kind of processes. But again, it is something where you constantly need human input because of the errors that are occurring in these processes where customers are doing the work now themselves or machines are doing the work for them.
We just talked about slowing economic growth due to automation, or at least, as we already talked about, not only because of automation. You actually said that it's the economies itself. Now, when we talk about the big challenges we face as a society, climate change, for example, one of the main things people say is we will have a lot of new jobs through climate change. Do you think that will actually happen? Mr. Benanav, you're already smiling, so I'll start with you.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that the big issue in the economy is just that for a long time now, private investors have not felt like it's a very good idea to do a lot of investment. And so in the United States, we see time and again, governments create kind of subsidies or tax breaks with the idea that companies will invest. And for the most part, the companies just distribute they either hold on to their earnings, like Apple has the largest war chest of retained earnings of any company in the world, or companies just distribute their profits as dividends and share buybacks. So there's a real problem of private investment. Basically, the engine of growth, which is private investment, has been running down for a long time. There's an idea now that governments could use the opportunity of the Green New Deal, use the opportunity of climate change to kind of kick the economy back into gear. And that often involves a lot of ideas about public investment. I think that there's probably something to that if they can do it, or if they do it through public investment. And now we're seeing the Biden administration begin to move on that in a way that I have to admit I didn't really expect. But the proof would be in the pudding, because there's a lot of reasons to expect that that won't really happen, that too much government involvement would threaten private control over the economy, the kind of power that very wealthy people have in the economy. And so I think it's very unclear whether that will happen. I should also say on the global scale, it's very hard to imagine these kind of Green New Deal processes creating nearly as many jobs as are needed in the economy. The dearth of jobs globally is so enormous that it's very unlikely that a global Green New Deal could actually soak up all of the excess labor in the economy. And that excess labor is, of course, one of the reasons why companies are moving abroad to take advantage of more insecure populations abroad. So it's hard to imagine that the Green New Deal would really create enough jobs to solve that global problem. It's also not clear to me whether switching to renewables and actually responding to climate change is compatible with a still growing economy. There's some material reasons to expect that growth might just not be compatible in the long run with responding to climate change. And I think more and more scientists already believe that. Scientists generally already believe that, and more people commenting on the policies are starting to face that reality as well.
Ms. Pfeiffer, would you like to add to that?
I see it pretty similar. Maybe I just want to add that I think we really have to think about redistribution on different levels. I'm pretty sure we can't go on with the idea of a permanently growing economy, because this planet won't last if we don't step back from this idea. That's first, and this is hard to do because every government also is keen on growth, of course. So this is really switched on the collective mindset. The other thing is we have to redistribute, for example, working time. A lot of people are working much too much. Other people are seeking jobs. We have to redistribute wealth, of course. I mean, what's happening now? It's nice that we now have governments that came back to pretty old ideas that investing in infrastructure could be a good idea. But as we have still some really a small part of single humans which have so much money in their hands that they can decide that going to the Mars is more important than thinking about how can we create an ecological, sustainable economy, and they just do it because they have the money. This is strange, and it's not a coincidence that so many books at the moment are talking about that we have a new form of feudalism, and there is something in this idea, I would say, because if pretty few people have so much economic power that really threatens every idea of democratic design of economy, of society. And I think we really have to talk about that. Mm-hmm. Also.
Where do you expect to see the frictions through job loss, maybe even further job loss, wherever it might originate from in our society, Ms. Pfeiffer?
The frictions?
Well, you said that we have a lot of really rich people who don't distribute the wealth to the society, but to whatever projects they might fancy at that moment. And when we see that more and more people lose their jobs, that might create a dissonance, disagreements, maybe a feeling of neglect from the government.
Yes.
So
I mean,
yeah, that's what I was getting at.
We know that doing work, cooperating with other people, is so much into our DNA. I mean, that makes us human. So if people don't have a chance to go into work, it's not only about existence, about payment, about wages. It's also about this. In our society, it's a major form of being part of society. If you're out of a job, you're not only out of job, you're out of society somehow. So it's normal to feel neglected because you are if you can't participate. Mm-hmm. So if we really would see a bigger job loss, we really have to talk about how we redistribute working time more fairly. We had this study some days ago that 55 hours of weekly working time, more of that could be deadly. There's a really hard causal effect between working more than 55 hours and morbidity. So we really have to think about that.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Benanav, you make a pretty similar point in your book, if I remember correctly. Would you like to?
Yeah. Yeah, just that I think especially given already slowing economies and the danger that long-term economic growth because of climate change poses to our survival, it's really important to redistribute work. And I think, we've lived now through a number of decades. People who are under 40, for example, but also many people over that age have experienced 2 once-in-a-lifetime crises in the early years of their lives. It has really negative effects on their lifetime earnings. It also means that many people, especially people who've lost their jobs or who are new labor market entrants or women who are returning to work after taking time off for childcare, they're often pushed into jobs that in one way or another are underpaying, temporary, fixed contract jobs that don't offer security or a chance to really imagine a livelihood for oneself. And that just means that, we're going to have to redistribute work and be fair about work, the distribution of work that has, especially as Ms. Pfeiffer said, work that has meaning for people, where they actually feel like they're making a contribution to the communities and societies that they live in. And so I think that, in fact, we can imagine, you know, there is a way to get to a world where we meet everyone's needs and redistribute work so we work less, and people have the time and the resources to rebuild a very vibrant civil society that I think has been that's been under threat recently. And I think that the kind of impasses that are being faced in the current economy are becoming so clear in the course of the Corona crisis. We've seen waves of, you know, discontent, struggles, populism, and so on, all indicating that the current model of running the economy is reaching its sell-by date.
Wow, what a great discussion. Unfortunately, we are already out of time. I could go on and on for like this forever, because I feel like we've only touched the really important points on this discussion. But maybe we will at some other point. So for now, thank you so much for taking the time and for the very valuable insights into this topic. Thank you.
Thank you.